She opened her eyes to a morning she didn't want. With great reluctance, she lifted her head and looked around the single room. The cabin was cold. The fire had been out for hours, and the cold and damp of the unseasonably cold spring had crept relentlessly in while she huddled under her warm blankets, waiting for her life to go away. It hadn't. Life had lingered to ambush her again with cold and damp, disappointment and loneliness. She clutched her thin covers to her chest as her eyes wandered to the stacked and sorted papers and parchment that had occupied her for the last week. There it was. Ollie's Finbock's life work, all in one stack. Translations of ancient papers, speculations of her own, careful copies of old documents rendered in black ink with her best guess at the missing words inked in red. Deprived of any significant purpose in her own life, she had retreated to ancient days and taken pride in her scholarly knowledge of them. She knew how Elderlings had once lived and interacted with dragons. She knew the names of Elderlings and dragons of old. She knew their habits. She knew so much about a past that no longer had any relevance. Elderlings and dragons had returned to the world. She had witnessed that miracle, and they would reclaim the ancient city of Kelsingraand and take up their lives there. All the secrets she had tried to tease out of old scrolls and mouldering tapestries meant nothing now. Once the new Elderlings gained their city, they would need only to touch the memory stone there to discover all their history for themselves. All the secrets she had dreamed of discovering, all the puzzles she had longed to solve, were finished now, and not by her. She was irrelevant. She surprised herself when she flung the blanket suddenly to one side and stood up. Cold wrapped her instantaneously. She stepped to her clothing trunks, the grand travelling trunks that she had packed so hopefully in the days before she left Bingtown. They had been stuffed when she began her journey, full of sensible clothes fit for a lady adventurer. Stoutly woven cotton blouses with a minimum of lace, split skirts for hiking, hats with veils to ward off insects and sun, sturdy leather boots. Little but memories remained of them now. The hardships of travel had softened the fabrics. Her boots were scuffed and leaked, the ties now a series of knots. Laundering clothes in the acidic waters of the river had been her only choice, but seams had weakened and hems had frayed. She drew on a set of her worn clothes with no thought as to what they would look like. No one was going to look at her anyway. She was finished forever with worrying about what she looked like or what people thought of her. An elderling gown, Leftrin's gift to her, hung on a hook. Of all the clothing she owned, this alone retained its bright colours and supple softness. She longed for its warmth, but could not bring herself to put it on. Rapskell had said it, and said it clearly. She was not an elderling. She had no right to the city of Kelsingraand, no right to anything pertaining to elderlings. Bitterness, hurt, and resignation to the reality Rapskell had voiced formed a tight, hard knot in her throat. She stared at the elderling gown until the brilliant colours shimmered from her unshed tears. Her sorrow only deepened as she thought of the man who had given it to her, her live-ship captain, Leftrin. Despite the differences in their stations in life, they had fallen in love with each other during the arduous journey up the river. For the first time in her life, a man had admired her mind, respected her work, and desired her body. He had kindled a like passion in her and awakened her to all that could exist between a man and a woman. He had created desires in her such as she had never known before. And then he had left her here, alone in a primitive cabin. Stop it! Stop whining! She stared at the elderling gown and forced herself to remember the wonderful moment when Leftrin had offered it to her, a priceless artifact, a family possession. He had shared it with her with never a qualm, and she had worn it as armour against cold and wind and even loneliness, worn it without a thought about its historical significance. How had she ever dared to rebuke the keepers for wanting something as warm and impervious as the priceless artifact she had enjoyed so often? And Leftrin? Was she faulting him for her loneliness? Hypocrite, she rebuked herself. Leftrin had had no choice but to return to Kasarek to fetch supplies for them. He had not abandoned her. She had chosen to stay here because she had believed that recording all that she saw in the untouched Elderling city was more important than being beside him.